Hello and welcome to the Game Day podcast with me, Sam Matterface, talkSPORT football correspondent Alex Crook, and our European football expert, it's Kevin Hatchard. On today's pod, Thursday night fun with the soundtrack provided by The Who, substitute, probably apt, bearing in mind Chelsea bring on the kids and Manchester City bring on the match winners. Arsenal could have gone 10 points clear this week at the top of the Premier League, but their lead is cut to 5. Everton and Bournemouth are in trouble, but not in as much trouble as Southampton. And Nottingham Forest are going to get out of it, you know. It's all on the Game Day podcast from talkSPORT.
I don't think Chelsea have got any chance at all of finishing in the top 4. They might not even finish in the European place. There's so much work to be done.
There's no point bringing in a project guy like Potter and then saying, oh, well, it didn't work in the first few months. See you later. We'll bring in the next guy.
Brighton run their ship brilliantly and Everton run an absolute dog's dinner of a business. It would be absolutely ludicrous for them to fire Frank Lampard. Chelsea's week was ruined by their defeat against Manchester City. Look, I've got to be honest with you, I watched the game last night and I thought it was very odd for Pep Guardiola to make the initial selections that he did, Kevin. But the difference was made when the changes came. Chelsea losing more players to injury. They've had a lot of problems with injury over the course of the season. That's definitely something that needs looking at. But when you're bringing on Chukwuemeka, Amari Hutchinson and Lewis Hall, and Manchester City are bringing on Jack Grealish and Riyad Mahrez, you know that there's a big problem. And bearing in mind how much Chelsea have spent over the course of the summer, that's got to be a worry, hasn't it?
It's extraordinary how thin the squad looked. I commentated on the game for talkSPORT International and we looked at the team sheets and it's that commentator's thing where you look through the subs and think, I've not really heard of that guy in terms of I haven't seen him play. And then you were looking and I thought Amari Hutchinson did okay when he came on. Seen Lewis Hall play in the Youth Cup for Chelsea and seen him play a little bit under Thomas Tuchel. But you know, it shows you the injury problems they've got because Mason Mount was injured in training, picked up a knock this week. They lost 2 players in the first 20 minutes. Raheem Sterling went off virtually with the first action of the game. And then they lost Christian Pulisic as well. That said, there are still big issues there going forward. We talked before about the fact that it's not just the fact they're not scoring goals, they're not really creating chances. And I thought some of the attacking play was so one-paced against City, especially in the second half when the game was on the line. I know Lewis Hall had that chance late on and he ended up blazing it wide, but it was quite a tepid display going forward. And you go back, it's been an issue for well over a year in terms of creating chances, scoring goals. They averaged 2 goals a game in the league across the whole of last season. But it feels like those issues are embedded at the moment. And that's what Graham Potter's got to tackle. He's got to make Chelsea much more dangerous and unpredictable going forward.
The issue is that, you know, you talk about the length of time that Chelsea have had problems with scoring goals. But this season's even worse. I think there was a suggestion last night that Chelsea have scored 18 goals less than at this stage last season. I mean, I'm not entirely sure that can be true, but if it is true, that's a massive worry. The truth is they're not scoring enough goals. They don't create enough chances. They don't look like doing either of those two things. And when you look at the personnel that's available to them, you're scratching your head as to where they spent all this dosh on, because Aubameyang came on as a substitute in the first half, might as well have not bothered, and then went off in the second half as a substitute.
We've spoken a lot this week on the show about recruitment and how important it is throughout the Premier League. And I know you're of the same thinking as me, Sam, that Chelsea's recruitment for a number of windows has been poor. And I think you're seeing that now. I think Graham Potter needs at least this window and the summer to try and turn it around. Aubameyang has been a poor purchase, but there's no real surprise there because Mikel Arteta didn't want him at Arsenal. It was an odd move to bring him back to the Premier League. I think his best days are very much behind him. And you look at the golfing quality between the two squads, as Kev said at the top of this piece, it's stark. I don't think Chelsea have got any chance at all of finishing in the top 4. They might not even finish in the European place. There's so much work to be done. But I don't necessarily think you can really lay the blame at Graham Potter's door. The tools he's been given are simply not good enough.
But the Chelsea fans are doing that. And last night on the sports bar, straight after the game, there was lots of people piling in and having a go at Graham Potter. If you look at his body of work as the Chelsea boss, do you think that he is going to be able to survive this pressure, Kevin? Because we talked about this on the podcast, I think it was on Monday morning or Tuesday morning when we did the first podcast of the week. And we were discussing the fact that Chelsea's approach to the way they manage their their coaching team, they want to change it. They want to be a little bit more patient. They want to build for the future. They want longer-term projects. We've seen Benoit Badiashile join this week from Monaco, and they've given him a 7.5-year contract. Chelsea now, it's almost determined to sort of send this message that this is all for the long term. But can their patience extend to not being in the Champions League, not being even in the Europa League next season?
It's got to. Otherwise, there's no point bringing in a project guy like Potter and then saying, oh, well, it didn't work in the first few months. See you later. We'll bring in the next guy. It just doesn't work. If you're going to do that, you have to use Mikel Arteta's phrase, trust the process. However, it was interesting listening to Thomas Tuchel recently. Obviously, he would know better than most about Chelsea's boom and bust cycle. And he said it's all very well saying trust the process and wanting people to come with you. But ultimately, if you don't get at least some of the results to go with it, people lose faith in the process and the whole thing falls apart anyway. So he hasn't got infinite patience, Potter. He hasn't got infinite time. And that's why I do feel bringing him in, even though I think he's a terrific coach. I'm a massive fan of what he did at Brighton. I think he's a really smart guy. I think he's a great coach. But this is the ultimate test because you're basically changing the entire ethos of a football club that's been in place for 2 decades. And you're saying, right, we're going to change the whole thing. It's a massive ask. It really is.
It's a massive job as well. Kai Havertz's performance again coming under scrutiny. He sort of slipped into a number 10 position after being the point man early on in the game. What does the future hold for him? I mean, Crook, you've often raised the question, what is he going to do? Where is he going to do it? I know Kev's a big fan. Where are we standing on Kai Havertz right now?
Obviously, he's written his name in Chelsea folklore with that goal in the Champions League final. But for me, he just isn't good enough. I know Kev will tell me he's being played out of position. That's probably right.
But he can't be not good enough, is it? I mean, obviously, this is a guy who leads the line for Germany. He's played well in German football. It's not that he's not good enough. Are Chelsea getting the best out of him? I mean, this is a very talented player. You don't spend £72 million on a player if he's not good enough.
How much was Timo Werner? He wasn't good enough either.
35 million quid, something like that.
Again, it goes down to recruitment. I sympathise with Kai Havertz because he signed at a time when the country was in lockdown. I think that definitely had an impact on both him and Timo Werner mentally. But with the greatest one in the world, is he going to score the goals to fire Chelsea to where they want to be? It isn't going to happen, Kev. It isn't going to happen. I'm sorry.
Well, look, he's 23. He scored a Champions League winning goal in a final already. He scored the winning goal in the final of the Club World Cup for what that's worth. He has scored brilliant goals for Germany. I thought he played okay for Germany, actually, at the World Cup. And he has been messed around. He's been put in different positions. He's had to adjust to a new league. He had COVID after he first arrived. That set him back. It was quite a hefty dose of COVID. And look, he has not played in the way that I know he can play. I've seen him many, many times in Germany. Has he hit those levels enough? No. But considering he's had a relatively short career, he's packed a hell of a lot in already. Scored that brilliant goal for Germany against England at Wembley recently. The talent is there. The quality is there. It's about the right coach getting the best out of him because I think there's still enormous potential there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, get what Crook's like. Unless you're scoring a hat-trick every game and getting 10 out of 10 performances, you're rubbish and should be discarded. In which case, he would have got rid of pretty much most of the Manchester City team in the first half. Kevin De Bruyne didn't have a particularly good start to the game, for example. Manchester City didn't have a great start to that game. But tactical tweaks and personnel changes at the start of the second half certainly influenced proceedings. Rico Lewis being played in a midfield position almost changed the game, didn't it, Crook?
Pep's a big fan of his, isn't he? You look at the fact he's putting his faith in him at a time when Manchester City are trying to claw back this deficit. I think it's great for the fans when somebody comes through the academy and gets the faith of the manager. And actually, I think we're starting to see the fruits now of Manchester City's academy. They've invested a lot, Sam, as you've told us before, in youth development. So, fair play that Pep is willing to put his faith in him. And I think in the second half, Manchester City were the dominant force. They deserved to win the game. And having said, a week ago that Arsenal were the favourites for the title, I'm now probably tilting back towards Manchester City. You'll be surprised to know.
That's a record, isn't it?
No. Sometimes he can do a U-turn within 17 seconds. Yeah, Rico Lewis on him. Pep Guardiola said last night, the last games, Rico has the ability to make this midfield better. He has the ability to make the whole team better. He changed the game. And he did, Kevin. I mentioned it earlier on. I thought it was a major influence on proceedings. But it was an odd selection in the first place, wasn't it? The way that he lined up. Bernardo Silva not playing as far forward as you would expect him to.
Yeah, it didn't work. And you had Joao Cancelo very high up on the right. And he was getting into good positions, but messed up every time. The crossing was atrocious. We saw Belgium Kevin De Bruyne from the World Cup in the first half. Every pass under hit, over hit, just not quite accurate enough. And it was a really poor performance, I thought, in the first half. The changes altered everything. Akanji looked much more stable in the centre of that rear guards. His passing to the fore once again. And Lewis, you mentioned, I love that kid already. I mean, one of my favourite moments of the season already was the look on his face when he scored in the Champions League. Absolutely amazing to see the pure joy on his face. So he can play. And it's quite interesting. One of the big narratives about Manchester City this season has been, did they make a big mistake allowing Sterling, Gabriel Jesus, Zinchenko to go in the same window? I do think one of the reasons they've done that is to create a pathway for youngsters to come through, because they haven't done that really. Phil Foden obviously came through, but he's exceptional. But if you're going to recruit the brightest and best from around the world, you have to be able to show them that they can get to the first team and improve and play. Because if you don't do that, you have a situation like you have with Jadon Sancho, where he goes, well, look, I'm never going to play. I'm going to go to Dortmund. Jamie Bino-Gittins was another one. I'm not going to play, so I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go to Dortmund. You have to prove to these kids that there's a facility for them to get through.
Yep, he's only 18 years of age. He comes from Bury in Manchester. He's playing for Manchester City. He's scoring Champions League goals. He's influencing big Premier League games. And he provided the knockout punch last night by being the heartbeat in that midfield. And not surprised, really. His dad owns a boxing gym. Let's move on to the other title contenders who Crook has written off after 1-0 draw. The first time that Arteta's side haven't scored in the Premier League all season, 17 games. And obviously, it's the first time they haven't won a home match all campaign as well. But that means it's all over, does it, Crook? Just because they couldn't beat one of the informed sides in the country, no longer are they favourites for the Premier League.
Well, I think in the eyes of the bookies, they've never been favourites for the Premier League, and it was partly...
No, but in your eyes, you were talking them up as favourites last week. They're favourites. They're going to go on and do it. From here, this is where they should go and make their mark. And then one bad result. It wasn't even a bad result. They drew 0-0 with a decent team. And all of a sudden, no longer are they contenders for the crown.
That was partly to wind up the Arsenal fans, because they're all being very humble and saying, no, we're happy if we just sneak into the top four. But it's going to be really interesting to see how they react from here, because you learn more about players in adversity than you do in success. And you're saying it's only a 0-0 draw, but you could see the frustration. You could certainly see the frustration on Mikel Arteta's face as he was parading around the touchline. I think that's a bit of a problem for Arsenal, because I think managers almost mirror their players. And if your manager is losing his head on the touchline, I don't think that necessarily helps the players. So I think it was poor from him. I think if you rile up a manager as placid as Eddie Howe, then you've got a little bit of a situation on your hands. And they just, to me, ran out of ideas. Yes, Newcastle defended well, but Arsenal couldn't break them down. I think maybe there's a blueprint there for teams, particularly going to North London now, of how to frustrate Arsenal and how to wind up Mikel Arteta. I think they're going to drop more points.
Not difficult to wind up Mikel Arteta. I remember going to a game at Liverpool where his antics on the touchline actually inspired Liverpool to start playing.
Exactly.
Arsenal had the better of them for a little while, and then after he got a little bit heated on the touchline, so did the Liverpool crowd, and therefore then the team. He did turn around afterwards and say he was a little bit disappointed that Newcastle played that way. They haven't played that way for 17 matches, he said, Kevin, which is a surefire way to suggest that you've been outdone by somebody else tactically.
And he's talking rubbish as well. They've only conceded 11 goals. They've been
Exactly.
excellent defensively. I mean, it's just garbage. And also, they carried a threat, I thought, at the other end. That they had moments, once they'd earned the right to play, they started to do that. And I thought it was an excellent Newcastle performance. They had chances as well. Joe Linton had a great chance that maybe he should have done better with. But I thought Arsenal were fine. I thought they were okay. I thought Ødegaard had some lovely moments. A goalless draw against Newcastle is not a big problem. In terms of Arteta, he's not going to change. That's him. He's mega intense, mega demanding. I actually think part of the energy from the crowd, there's been a big shift at Arsenal in terms of the intensity of the crowd. Part of that, I think, is down to him. So, love him or hate him, I don't think he's going to change. You can see why him and Guardiola got on so well at Manchester City, because they're both mega intense. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Newcastle remain the best defence in the Premier League with an impressive record, 11 goals conceded. They've kept 10 clean sheets now. Manchester United are on the up as well. They had a cracking Tuesday night. I was at this one. A comfortable victory for Manchester United. They won by 3-0. I thought in the first half they were very calm, very composed, and just edging their way to supremacy in the match. I spoke to Gary O'Neill afterwards, and we'll get to Bournemouth in just a second. He seemed to think they played very well in the match. I don't know if he was doing a PR job, bearing in mind that he'd slated his team at the weekend. But I thought Manchester United were in control right from the very beginning to the very end of this match, pretty much, Crook.
It's getting boring, isn't it? Being a Manchester United fan, you turn up, you win the game, you climb the table, and then you move on to the next one. It's a bit of a throwback situation, but they were in control. Composed is the right word. Casemiro, excellent in midfield. Again, obviously made some changes. Harry Maguire comes back into the 11, which always fills me with a little bit of dread. But I think defensively, they were largely resolute, and Marcus Rashford gets his trademark goal. I think he is officially now in the best scoring form in terms of successive matches in his career. I heard your commentary suggest that. So it was a good win. I thought Bournemouth were better than they were against Crystal Palace. They couldn't have been much worse, to be honest. And if you're Gary O'Neill, you have to cling on to those positives. But there was only ever going to be one winner. And we're starting to get a bit excited. 2 big games to come. Man City at home, Arsenal away. If they win those 2, wow.
Well, it could all come crashing down very quickly, couldn't it, Kevin? Because as Crook has already alluded, they play in the FA Cup. They could be out of that by the weekend. They could be out at the League Cup by Tuesday night when they play Charlton at home. They could lose to Manchester City in the derby and then lose to Arsenal. So the whole season could come crashing down, and then Crook would not be bored. Interestingly, he does get bored quite easily, doesn't he? Bearing in mind that he's been whinging and moaning about how bad they've been over the course of the season. They've only had an upturn in the last 6 or 7 weeks. But they are playing well. And speaking to Erik ten Hag, I think he's one of the reasons for that. His calmness, his directness, his communication levels, the way he talks to his players, the way he outlines what he wants from them, and is very clear, very strong, and takes no nonsense, makes a massive difference to this group.
And do you know what he is? He's honest. And you talk to
so
ex-players.
Important.
Yeah, 100%. Because you talk to ex-players, and a lot of them will tell you one of the things they prize in a manager is honesty. If I'm not going to play, tell me, and tell me how I can improve. If I've got a genuine chance of competing for a place, I need to know. If I haven't, I'll move on. And that's a running theme. And I think with him, I think he's even down to how he's dealt with this Jadon Sancho situation. Would have been very easy to hammer him publicly and say he's not fit, he's not ready to play, he's out of my thoughts completely. No, he went, look, he needs time. We've sent him away with coaches in the Netherlands to work, and we want him back as soon as possible. So even in that, the kind of gentle way in which he's handled that shows you he's an excellent man manager. I did enjoy him trying to write in pouring rain. That was very good. Trying to write notes in midweek. But look, I think he's terrific. I said ahead of the appointment he was a good coach. My fear was, ahead of him going to Manchester United, would he be given the authority and the scope that he needed? And to be fair, he has been. You know, he's come through the Ronaldo situation. They gave him license to put his foot down when necessary. That's worked out really well. And I think in many ways, that's been the making of him.
Yeah, he said afterwards when I was speaking to him in the tunnel that we have to go from game to game. The belief is growing, but don't get too far ahead. I think he was talking to Alex Crook. It's only January, he said, not even half a season. So it's difficult for him to get carried away. He's quite a level-headed guy, unlike you, Mr. Crook. But what are your expectations now for Manchester United? Are you expecting them to challenge for the title?
No, I'm not. Let's be honest. I think at the start of the season, particularly after that Brentford debacle, if you'd have told me we were sitting here on the 6th of January and people like you would even be talking about the title, I'd have thought you were mad. Top 4 is what it's all about. I think they can challenge probably for third, maybe even second place, and lift a trophy. Winnable FA Cup home game against Everton. They're into the semi-finals of the Carabao, let's be honest. There's no chance that Charlton beat them in midweek. And obviously they've got a big game to come in the Europa League. So I think there's every chance that that trophy drought could be over this season.
Yeah, looking forward to that Barcelona game in the Europa League. That's live on talkSPORT as well. Crystal Palace not having a great time at this moment. And Tottenham have got out of their slumber, Kevin, with a 4-0 victory in midweek. Antonio Conte was the narrative prior to the game. He said, well, maybe I need to learn a little bit more and better English in order to be able to converse with you guys because you're all getting the wrong impression. I mean, he is a clever fella, but he is talking absolute codswallop, isn't he? He knows exactly what he's doing. He was winding everybody up and he was trying to get them into that sort of spiky mode so that they had a point to prove.
What we saw was the quality they have going forward. I thought Harry Kane was absolutely sensational, not just in terms of the goals, but in terms of his creativity. So dangerous when he drops into that 10 role. And Brian Heel was outstanding. And I think I talked recently about them needing somebody unpredictable. Somebody, because it's all about pre-rehearsed patterns. It's all about, Antonio Conte's plan for getting through a team. Sometimes you need a guy who's got a bit of X factor, and Heel has absolutely got that. I thought he was sensational. The way to the pass for Kane for the second goal, I thought was tremendous.
It's been an underwhelming second season for Patrick Vieira, Alex.
Yeah, I think the jury's out a little bit on Patrick Vieira, and it's not just me saying that.
Oh, here we go. He's had one bad result, and all of a sudden he's getting sacked as well.
No,
the Axeman's back, Vieira out. Arsenal, get rid of Arteta. He's dropped 2 points at home for the first time this season. Go on. Sack Vieira.
It's not just me saying that. There were whispers in the summer that actually the board weren't delighted with the job that he did last season. I know he stabilised him in the Premier League. He reached an FA Cup semi-final.
Hold on. He got to the semi-finals of the FA Cup. They completely turned the playing style around, despite the fact that he had 10 senior pros when he started in the end of June. How on earth would they not be impressed with what happened? I remember looking at the results and thinking they're pretty similar in terms of the way that they finished the season in terms of points and league position to what Roy Hodgson did. But as a Crystal Palace fan will tell you, when they had a season ticket watching Roy Hodgson's football, they just used it as a method to go to sleep early, whereas now they quite like going to Selhurst Park. Why on earth would the board not be happy?
I think the fans were happy. I think the board were hoping for a little bit more. Listen, you have to ask them about their reasons for that and their ambitions. But I don't really know where to bracket Palace this season, to be honest. I'm looking at the league table. They're not, for me, one of the teams who will go down because they do have too much quality. I'm a big fan of Michael Olise in particular, but they're not quite in a position to challenge for a European place. I think the board would like them to be in a sort of Brighton/Brentford situation. At the moment, I think they're probably just a little bit below those two sides, and maybe that's why they're asking for more. As I say, not my saying. I'm just relaying what I've been told.
Well, you did initially start saying the jury is out on Vieira, and you're not the only one who's saying it's what you actually said. Now you're changing your mind and saying, it's not me saying it, I've read it somewhere. Kevin, what's your viewpoint on Vieira?
I think he's done a really good job. I think to turn around the playing style in the time that he has is really quite remarkable. To teach players a new method. I think it's difficult, though, because, talk about Brighton, you talk about Brentford, years and years and years of recruitment and data analysis and infrastructure. And
Chelsea could learn something from them, you would think.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I think actually that is the direction I think in the end Chelsea will go down, that kind of data-led recruitment approach. But I think teams like Brentford and like Brighton are making it tough for the mid-table to lower in the table teams, because teams are looking at them and thinking, oh, well, they've done it. Why can't we do it? It's a really hard thing to do. Brentford and Brighton are two of the best run clubs in Europe, not just in England, in Europe. So, look, if every season Palace finish mid-table, for me, is a massive success. They have no divine right to be in the Premier League whatsoever. And I think if Vieira can get them finishing in mid-table, playing the style of football that they're playing, great. That's what you're going for.
It's fascinating you say that, because there was a lot of talk after the Everton-Brighton game. We're going to get to that in just a second. That a lot of Everton supporters, quite rightly in a sense, were asking, how on earth are we in a situation where we're getting beaten 4-1 against Brighton? Well, the answer's pretty clear, really. Brighton run their ship brilliantly, and Everton run an absolute dog's dinner of a business behind the scenes. And that is the reason why Brighton are on the rise and Everton are on the fall. Brentford are in a similar sort of position. They've run their club very well over the course of the last 10 years. And that's why they gave Liverpool a scolding on Monday night. It was a terrible performance by Liverpool. I think Brentford were brilliant, and they should be applauded for the way they approached the game. And by the way, that they analysed the Liverpool backline, especially from corners, and realised that there was joy to be had. And boy, did they have some joy from corners, Alex.
They bullied them. And we've seen that from Brentford at home before. They did it against Arsenal at the start of last season. They did it against Manchester United at the start of this season. You'll hammer me because I've compared them to Wimbledon of the past, but I think there is a similarity there. And actually, Kevin Campbell agreed with me when I raised it on White and Jordan early this week. That's not to take away from what Brentford do. They are an absolute pest to play against, particularly in their own backyard. I think Thomas Frank is someone who Brentford have done well to tie down, because, for example, if Jurgen Klopp decided to leave Liverpool, I think he would have to be part of the conversation. I think he's an excellent manager. And they did it without Ivan Toney as well. And they did it without Christian Eriksen as well. And you look at the second half of last season, without those two players, I think Brentford would have gone down. So clearly they've evolved as a football club. Again, we talk about recruitment. Their recruitment has been excellent. They're in a great place right now.
Yeah. What's the problem with Liverpool? They've dropped 23 points this season, which is one more than the entire of last season, Kevin. And they've conceded more goals. They've scored less goals. They've created less chances. They've dropped more points, as we've said. All of the statistics are pointing in one direction. Why?
Yeah, huge issues. I do still think there was, certainly at the start of the season, a physical and mental hangover from playing every game it was possible to play, chasing every tournament or league right until the end. I think also the disappointment of missing out on the Premier League title race on the final day and then losing the Champions League final, that's got to have an impact as well. But I think actually this is down to intensity. If you look at Liverpool and their successes under Jurgen Klopp, it's been about their work without the ball as much as their work with the ball. And I think because they're not putting enough pressure on the ball, that high line is being exposed. Jurgen Klopp's never going to change that. He's never going to stop squeezing the pitch in that way, but he has to find a way of getting more out of his team physically, because that's what's really hurting them at the moment. And also missed chances. They had some great chances early on. Darwin had that shot cleared off the line by Ben Mee. If that goes in, it could be a completely different game. And so there are big issues there. And what I think Liverpool fans hoped was that the World Cup break might be a chance to reset, but they're making the same mistakes as they were making before that break.
Crook, Darwin Núñez missed a lot of chances, had a great opportunity ruled out for offside after a brilliant finish. Is he 2022-23's Timo Werner, or is he a slow burner like Harry Kane?
I think it's really difficult when a striker gets into a habit of missing chances, and therefore the criticism comes his way. There's a good player there, but at the moment he is judged on chance conversion and goals scored, and I think he's falling below the levels that Liverpool would have expected.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Look, you want him to score goals, of course, he's a centre forward, but look at the chaos he creates. Look at the pace he has. Look at what he does to defenders. Look how he brings others into the game. There have been some really lovely moments of link up between him and Mo Salah.
I think
Salah, that bodes well.
Definitely.
Yeah, that bodes well going forward. The guy is still young. He's scored so many goals for Benfica, so he can't be that bad a finisher. I think he also suffers from the fact that people have made this facile comparison with Erling Haaland. It's ridiculous because Haaland is a one-off. There's nobody quite like him in world football. You cannot compare Nunez to him. If you're going to do that, well, let's all compare everybody with Messi or Mbappe. It doesn't work like that. You can still be an outstanding player without being as good as Erling Haaland. So just because they were signed at the same time, just because they were both signed for big money, it's irrelevant. It's about what Nunez can bring to Liverpool. Yes, he can score more goals. Yes, he can look a bit better in front of goal with his finishing. But as you say, it's not like he scored no goals at all. He's got quite a few goals already. I think there's a really talented player there.
Let's head to the bottom of the table. Leicester 0, Fulham 1. Leicester struggling under Brendan Rodgers. I do hope they get past Gillingham on Saturday, lunchtime, live on talkSPORT 2. Leeds 2, West Ham 2. Good game at Ellen Road. Ellen Road, always an entertaining place to go, full of goals. Aston Villa 1, Wolves 1. I went to that game, did that for talkSPORT. Danny Ings coming off the bench. A little mistake by Jose Sarr just allowed him an extra second to lift it over the goalkeeper. Villa poor in that game, actually, after a brilliant performance against Tottenham. I thought technically and tactically they got it all wrong. But Leon Bailey's miss at the end of the game, oh, God, what are you going to do to him, Crook? I mean, if you're sucking Arteta, getting rid of Nunez and having a go at poor old, who else were you having a go at? Patrick Vieira. What are you going to say about Leon Bailey? You'll never let him back in.
Well, it was a shocker, wasn't it? I think Jim White interviewed Ronnie Rosenthal on the Breakfast Show on Friday, and it did bring back memories of that famous miss in the first Premier League season.
Wasn't that
against
bad?
Aston Villa. But listen, he's taking a bit of stick.
Kev, it was quite bad. It was quite bad.
But it wasn't Ronnie Rosenthal bad. There was no goalkeeper.
There was no goalkeeper here either.
But he's taking a bit of stick, isn't he, for Unai Emery's comments after the game about him crying over the miss.
Well, he did cry.
I think Emery's probably exaggerating that. But do you know what? I don't mind that.
Hold on.
He was in tears.
He was in tears. He was on the pitch, laying down with his hands on the edge of his arms, crying, sobbing, his body vibrating behind him. I saw him do it, and he was down there for at least 3 or 4 minutes.
Was he crying over the miss, or was he crying over his Aston Villa career, which, let's be honest, hasn't been great? But I'm in favour of that show of emotion, because I think too often, and we're going to talk about Southampton in a minute, too often you see players who lose games or they miss opportunities, and it doesn't affect them in the same way it affects the fans who are watching from the stands.
That was actually Emery's point. That was Emery's point. His point was he cried good, because he cares about it. That was Emery's point. He wasn't making a mockery of the fact that he was in tears. I spoke to Emery. Emery said, I said to him, how was he said to you after the game? He said, look, he's crying. But good, because it means he feels it. He understands it. So I don't think there's... Listen, it's a bit... I think it was a bit over the top. At the end of the day, it wasn't a Champions League final. It wasn't a goal that stopped them from winning the FA Cup. It wasn't a goal that got them relegated. It was, it stopped them getting 3 points against Wolves. They're not going down, Aston Villa. I mean, it was probably a little bit OTT. But, there we go. At least he's feeling it. And fans can't argue with the fact that he wants to be part of that team. We'll get to Southampton, Nottingham Forest. I know you're passionate about that as well, Crook, in just a second. But I'm passionate about Everton 1, Brighton 4. The talk the next day, Crook was texting me all day. Is he going to go? Is he going to go? Has he gone? Has he gone? Has he gone? And I said, no, he's not gone. He's not gone. He's not gone. And we knew he wasn't going to go because it would be absolutely ludicrous for them to fire Frank Lampard. Whatever you think of Frank Lampard as a coach, bearing in mind they had the best defence in the Premier League up until about 2 weeks before the World Cup, whatever you think of them as a coaching team, whatever you think, the truth of the matter here is that the big issue, and Everton fans should be annoyed about this, they should be wound up about this, is that their owner has spent far too much money on guff. They've spent so much time hiring, firing, clearing out players from previous managers. You're talking about a squad that is such a hodgepodge, Kevin, of former managers' cast-offs, that we're in a situation where Frank Lampard now can't spend any money because of FFP, right? Can bring in possibly 2 players that might make 3% difference between now and the end of the season. What on earth is he supposed to do? But come on, be realistic. They're not going to sort this out by sacking the manager.
No, I don't think they will. I think it's a bit of both. I think you're absolutely right. Lampard's hamstrung by the players at his disposal and the fact he can't really change it. So that's certainly true. I think he needs to do better in terms of how he sets them up. They did well against Manchester City defensively, no question about that. But they got schooled by Brighton. And the fourth goal for Brighton is one of the worst Premier League goals I have ever seen in my entire life. It starts with an atrocious free kick from McNeil. And then Idrissa Gana Gueye, I don't know what he's doing. And then he had the cheek to blame Pickford for it. Just atrocious. Absolutely awful. So there was a graphic on TV in midweek about all of the players that Everton have signed under Moshiri, 20 million plus. I mean, the list is just beyond belief. There's about three good ones.
It's frightening.
And what really stood out to me, actually, I was thinking about this, about in comparison with Brighton. With Everton, I reckon the average football fan of that whole list of 20 million plus signings, I reckon the average football fan would know most of them already. Like they'd arrive at the club and they go, oh, I know about him. He's been here or whatever. I reckon with Brighton's signings, the average football fan hasn't got a clue who they are. And I think that's the difference, because Brighton come up with guys and you go, where's he from? I've never heard of him. Everton will sign established players, and some of them are in it for a payday. Not all of them, but some of them, and that's quite clear. So I know that's quite an allegation to make, but it comes back to what Crookie was saying about how much do they care? And when they get to a club like Everton, it's comfortable. It's a comfort zone. It's a club with delusions of grandeur that thinks it should be challenging for Europe. It was a club that challenged in the 80s. It's been a hell of a long time since then. There's no divine right for them to be in the top half of the table.
Someone said on the Crook show earlier this week that that Frank Lampard should be fired because Everton aren't usually in a relegation battle.
Beyond belief.
I was like, what? They're always in a relegation battle.
Exactly.
They've been in a relegation battle since 1995. I mean, it's been non-stop. I mean, they've had the odd season where they finished sort of challenging for the European places has been the odd season, but most of the time they start a season hoping to get 40 points first of all. I mean, they are perennially in the bottom half of the table over the course of the Premier League era. They're definitely more often than not in the bottom half of the table. Talking of bottom halves of the table, in fact, talking of bottom of the table, Southampton were beaten at home by Nottingham Forest. Southampton beaten again. Now, Crook did a huge rant in which he suggested that it was the right thing to get rid of Nathan Jones early, admit you've made a mistake and move on. Nathan Jones himself says, blame lies solely with me, which is a bit odd because he's only had about 5 games in charge. So it's not really actually his fault because he didn't sign any of the players in the summer and certainly wasn't part of this recruitment policy, which was buy cheap, sell expensive, which hasn't worked out at all. Are they going to sack him, do you think, Crook?
I think you would struggle to find any Southampton fan who would advocate him staying on. And I think it's a very difficult situation. There were so many empty seats at St Mary's on Wednesday night. There was so much apathy. There was so much toxicity, both at half-time and at full-time. And I think it's difficult. And I think the owners looking at those empty seats, that's ultimately what helps make up people's minds. If they see the fans are staying away and it hits the club in the pocket, then I think they're going to be forced into a situation where they might have to make a change. They've got some big games coming up. The next game, I think it's live on talkSPORT 2, is Everton away. If they lose that would be a really difficult situation to see Nathan Jones coming back from. And what I did say in the rant, I don't necessarily blame Nathan Jones because I think he's been given a job that his credentials don't necessarily deserve. And I think he is struggling to get a tune out of these players. He played a back three at home to a Forest side and only scored 1 goal away from home all season. He persisted with that back three until the last 10 minutes of the match. They didn't have a single shot on target. It was very basic, the Southampton approach. Lump it upfield, more often than not straight into the gloves of Dean Henderson. And I didn't sense from the body language that the players are behind Nathan Jones. And these are similar stories to what we heard at Stoke City. But the difficulty is, if you do sack him, who's going to want that job? You know, who's going to want to be the third Southampton manager of the season with this young, inexperienced team? They're trying to address that in this transfer window. They've got Mislav Orsic pretty much through the door. They're looking at Michael Keane as well. I think they've realised, the owners, that the transfer policy that you've mentioned was a massive gamble. At the moment, it's one that isn't paying off. I don't see a way out for Southampton. I don't see a way out for Nathan Jones.
12 points from 17 matches. Nathan Jones, listen, he obviously has some talent. Luton Town fans will tell you that. 2 good spells there. The Southampton fans not at all convinced. You don't know what you're doing was the chant at full time. Kevin, he obviously was never going to turn the opportunity to manage in the Premier League down. But is there an argument to suggest that actually he's made a mistake by accepting a job which was always going to be very difficult, even if you've got a lot more experience than Nathan Jones?
I think
this is a job for Sean Dyche, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think managers can't get to where he's got to, and this is rarefied air, a Premier League job. Let's not forget that. This is the pinnacle of English football. You can't get there unless you back yourself. And I don't think, any manager in that position would turn it down. I think this is all on the club. And I know this is a bit of a Brighton loving, but it's true. When Potter went from Brighton, that wasn't something they wanted or necessarily foresaw in the sense that they thought Chelsea were going to come in and take their manager. However, it's quite clear they had a profile of manager they wanted to go for. They had a list of managers, and De Zerbi is similar to Potter in the way that he works. Different tactically in some ways, and we've seen that already. But broadly, it's the same thing. Alex was telling me, Alex is well connected at Southampton and in that area, and he knew, and everybody, and a lot of people knew, that Hasenhüttl was going long before he did, in the sense that there'd be, that wasn't a massive secret. It wasn't like, oh, wow, Hasenhüttl's gone. So they had time. Where was that list? Because if there was a list, Nathan Jones shouldn't have been on that list. And that's not his fault, but you bring in a guy who's as intense and nervous as he is. Now, that can work if you've got time and if you can bring the players along with you. But I cannot believe anyone with any kind of foresight would have him on that list. And who else did they consider? So it all seems to have been a bit haphazard, a bit off the cuff. And I've got no faith, really, that if they made a change, they go into it with any kind of planning at all. It might succeed off the cuff and by accident almost, or we'll bring in Sean Dyche because he's a bit of a firefighter. But where's the planning? It's crazy.
There must be lessons to be learned for Southampton going forward, because they look like they're going to go down. Maybe they'll do a Burnley, go down, and apologies to Burnley because we gave them a hell of a lot of stick last year. They cleared the decks. They're playing brilliant football. And Vincent Kompany has turned out to be a brilliant manager. So well done to them, because they look absolutely terrific. And they will be an asset to the Premier League should they come back up. Maybe sometimes that's what you need to do. And maybe Everton, who probably think they're a bit too big to go down, it might not be a bad thing if they went down, cleared the decks and started again as well. Because ultimately, the way things are going at the moment, it's just that they're clawing on and hanging on every year. That's not fun. That's not fun for anyone. That is for sure. But we'll see what happens when the Premier League resumes next week. We've got big games for you, including Everton against Southampton next Saturday. That's in about 10 days' time. But we've also got before that Fulham-Chelsea on a Thursday night. We'll look ahead to that next week and the rest of the weekend's football as well. So stick around for that. Turn your notifications on your phone, and as soon as the podcast drops, you will get it. It's the Game Day podcast from talkSPORT.